I'm Carole Taylor. On this episode of Journal, we ask the question, just who is John Rustad? Now, that's an especially unusual question for me to ask, since John and I were both elected to the Gordon Campbell BC Liberal government back in 2005. So we spent 4 years in caucus at the same time. But given the way that government works, which is often in silos, we didn't actually spend a lot of personal time together. So I, along with many of you, have been surprised in this election year to see Mr. Rustad in a head-to-head with Premier Eby for the province's top job, while the BC Liberals, united, have basically disappeared. So what is going on? And how did we get here? Well, we know some of the backstory from newspapers. The messy split between Kevin Falcon and John, leading to John sitting briefly as an independent, and then his surfacing as the leader of a previously pretty quiet BC Conservative Party. Lo and behold, something about this reinvention has appealed to many British Columbians. So I ask again, who is John Rustad? What would his priorities be if he were to be elected Premier? Or alternatively, how would he handle the job of Leader of the Opposition? Most importantly, how would he approach the crises we have in affordable housing, decriminalization, safe supply of drugs, disorder in our streets, climate change, budget deficits, and on and on? So let's find out. Back with John Rustad after this short break. We're happy to be in conversation today with John Rustad. And John, what a roller coaster ride you've had in the past year. The public, we only know sort of the surface things, but what happened?
I get that question more than anything associated with politics, because everybody thinks, like, how did you take a party from 2% or 3% in the polls to leading in the polls in British Columbia and having an opportunity to form government? And I think what it really boils down to is just people are sick and tired of what's going on in the province. They really want change. They want something that is different. And we've been able to tap into that. And I think that ultimately has been the big factor in our rise in this province.
And was it as nasty with Kevin Falcon as the papers portrayed it?
I don't hold any hard feelings towards Kevin at all. There was obviously the banter back and forth, and you've been involved in politics for a long time as well. You know how politics can play out, particularly between adversaries, people that are duking it out. But I really sort of looked at it from perspective of Kevin, and at the end here, did the right thing. The policies and approaches that David Eby is bringing in British Columbia, they're ideologically driven, they're very destructive to our province. And he said he's going to put his own personal ambitions aside to do what's right for the province of British Columbia. And so I thank him for that. I mean, it was a hard thing for him to do, a very hard thing for him to do, but ultimately it came together quite quickly in the end.
So before we get to your priorities, just since you mentioned it, I was surprised that some of the BC United candidates say they're still going to run, because the whole idea of this was not to split the right. Is that going to be a factor, or is that going to get smoothed over in the next month?
It's hard to know exactly how it works. I mean, a lot of the candidates, I think, for the United Party, and I can't speak for them, obviously, but I think they're feeling betrayed, right? They had all along been told, the polls are wrong, we're going to be up for the fight, we're going to do this, we're going to win seats, and then all of a sudden it came to an end. And they feel like, well, wait, what changed? What changed from the Sunday to the Wednesday of that week when Kevin decided to terminate the campaign for the BC United Party? And so a lot of them are feeling like, well, wait a second, I've still got, all of this energy, I still want to do these things. So we'll see how it plays out in the end. But, there's lots of things to be doing as being part of the Conservative Party of British Columbia. It doesn't have to necessarily be running. As you know, there's many other things to be able to do to contribute, to be able to see our province on a much more positive path.
So the big question is, who is John Rustad? What are your priorities?
It's funny. I think it was Vaughn Palmer, I think, said he's known me for 20 years, but he doesn't know me. Yeah. And I've gone about doing my work over the years in politics, and kind of stayed more or less out of the limelight in terms of these things, just getting stuff done, getting the things that need to be done. And so certainly as a Conservative Party going forward, what we need to be looking at doing is getting British Columbia back to work, whether it is our resource sector that is absolutely being crippled, whether it is even a tech sector, whether it's the small businesses and making sure that they can succeed. But all of that from a perspective of we need to deal with affordability. And the only real way to deal with that is we need higher wages. And you cannot drive up wage increases unless you are more competitive, unless companies have the confidence to be able to invest in BC, and unless there's a profit margin for them to be able to do wage increases. So everything we need to do needs to be about how do we help people with their quality of life? How do we make sure that people can have that dream of living and staying in British Columbia? I mean, 1 in 2 youth are thinking about leaving this province. 1 in 3 people are thinking about leaving this province. What is that saying about our policies? It's saying that we're going in completely in the wrong direction. Nobody can afford to be here. You can't afford to invest here. Nobody wants to be able to build a future here. That should change. As you know, British Columbia's got so much potential.
And when we were first in government together, I mean, forestry was a huge revenue producer for the province. And you just mentioned people don't want to invest. Well, we've seen our own forestry companies either having to close down or not do expansions or invest in the United States or Sweden or North Carolina. So what would you do differently with forestry? Because you know that backwards and forwards. What would you do in forestry that's different?
So you're absolutely right. I mean, we're the highest cost producers by a long shot. And when you're the highest cost producers and then you can't get access to fiber, you're saying, how do I operate? I don't have trees to mill, and even if I had trees, I can't make a profit at it. And so that is ultimately what is driving these decisions by companies to exit British Columbia and to not invest in British Columbia. So that needs to change. First of all, we need to create stability on the fiber supply. And there needs to be changes in terms of how we do that. We actually need to start looking at our forests from a perspective of the whole tree so that we aren't leaving as much waste behind. We're doing more incentives to be able to utilize that waste with industry. But the big factor we need to do is we need to drive down costs. And so we're going to replace our stumpage system. We're going to get rid of the antiquated system. We're actually going to go to a value-added end product tax where the more you do with the fiber, the more value you can create from the tree. It actually creates input credits in terms of how you have to manage with the fiber. We're going to do a complete review of top to the bottom of all the cost structure within the British Columbia with an eye of what can we take out, what doesn't need to be done. To get rid of the overlays in permitting, we're going to go to a single project, a single permit process, which then will eliminate a tremendous amount of the overhead. So for example, Canfor, when they closed the mill up in Fort St. John, it was taking 3.2 years just to get a single cutting permit. You can't wait that long. You can't go through that kind of process. In my area, it's taking over 2 years, between 2 and 3 years, where I live in the middle province. And BC Timber Sales, which has an equivalent to 2 million cubic meters of wood that they can put on the market annually, in 3 years, they didn't put any wood on the market. That's enough wood to keep 3 sawmills going. So this is what this government has done, and so we need to reverse that kind of damage and make sure that we can get a footing underneath our forest sector, make it competitive, and let's get people back to work.
So you believe that can be done through changes in regulations and legislation, maybe both?
Yeah, so there's some things that we can just implement, obviously, through regulations and through policy. But there will need to be significant legislative change as well, particularly when it comes to the permitting process, because as you know with legislation, the permitting process has been, it's been sort of implemented through 4 or 5 different acts in terms of all these various components. And it's these overlaps and these processes that don't need to be there. So that's, we'll have to clean that up. So it'll take a fair bit of work through legislation.
So one thing that you just said, of course, raises the fears of some of the climate folks, and that's one permit process. They feel that you're doing away with the environmental assessment.
Certainly not. We want to make sure that we maintain the environmental standards that we have. I think people in British Columbia should be proud of the fact that we are the highest quality producers and most environmentally sensitive producers of all of our products that we have in BC. And people forget that forest products are the most environmentally sensitive, the most environmentally friendly, the most renewable products that we could ever want in our society. And British Columbia has the potential to do that better than anywhere else. The problem is we're just hopelessly managed at this level. It's too locked in. So we need to be able to make sure we uphold those standards, but we need to remove those layers of bureaucracy that are just creating costs and time delays.
So the people who would like to paint you as a climate denier, are you a climate denier?
Absolutely not. Climate's changing. There's no question it is. I've never denied that. Matter of fact, David Eby lies about it all the time. I've said, please point to where I've said that, and he can't. So that's fine. They're going to do what they do. Matter of fact, most of the campaign seems to be based around lies and misinformation. Climate is changing, but what we need to be doing is we need to be looking at how we adapt. And so we need to look at getting rid of the carbon tax, because taxing people into poverty is not going to change the weather. We need to look at how we expand our agriculture production to deal with our changing climate. We need to look at how we better manage water and invest in water research and management of it. We need to be looking at our infrastructure, making sure that we're meeting the challenges that we have coming from climate. But most importantly, quite frankly, we need to be focused on making sure that people can actually build a future here in British Columbia.
Interesting that you spent some time talking about this with Andrew Weaver.
Yes.
That caused a fuss.
A little bit. And Andrew and I actually have a number of things that are in common. I mean, besides wanting to get rid of this ideological socialist government that's destroying the province. But more than that, but it's, our power generation, for example. We do not have enough electrical power generation to meet these goals that people want, whether it's heat pumps or whether it's electric vehicles. We need to get into seriously having a conversation about how we generate that power.
More of that serious conversation. We're just going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with John Rustad. John left us with a tempting little hanging note that neither he nor Andrew Weaver want this particular government to continue. But any chance that Weaver would run for the Conservatives?
So we actually have invited him to run, and I think he seriously considered it. Unfortunately, there were some conditions, some things that were happening in his personal life that made it just too difficult for him to be able to run. But the things that we have in share, for example, he is a big fan of expanding mining. We need the resources. We need copper. We need the base metals. We need precious metals. We need, the rare earth minerals. We need these things to be able to have the products and have the changes that we want in society. We need to be looking at energy generation. We are net importers of electricity. 84% of the energy we consume comes from hydrocarbons. Only 16% is electricity, and when Site C comes on, that'll go up to around 18%. We are still well short of what we need to do as a society. And if we wanted every household in the province to have heat pumps, including all the businesses like this to be able to have heat pumps, we would need to build the equivalent of 6 or 7 more Site C dams. And we're not going to be building another dam likely in this province. So where's that power going to come from? So we had a serious conversation about actually looking at nuclear for the province of British Columbia. But these are things that we need to have a conversation with the public on. We need to do a full engagement of what that power needs are going to be, how we're going to meet that, and what it means for rates, what it means for our economy, what it means for competitiveness, but most importantly, what it means for quality of life for people in British Columbia.
That's always been a shutdown conversation before. If you mention nuclear, no one wants to listen, but I think that conversation is coming. You made a joke right before we went on air about what you would do your first day as Premier.
Well, actually, the first day as Premier, of course, the legislature won't be sitting. We actually need to extend the environmental certificates on natural gas pipelines. So we have 3 more pipes that are permitted to the coast, and they've already had their 5-year extensions. And permits start expiring in November. If they expire, it will mean having to go back into environmental assessment at a cost of between $300 million and $1 billion per pipe, and likely take a decade, which would mean for another generation we'll have lost the opportunity to be able to export more natural gas to a world that certainly needs it and generate the revenue we need in BC. So the first thing we will do is actually give a 10-year extension on those pipes so that we can take full advantage of that. But I think what you're referring to is actually the first day we get back in the legislature. Of course, there's many things the NDP have done that are very damaging to British Columbia and to people in British Columbia that we'll be looking at repealing. And so I joke and say, maybe the first act, we should call it the NDP Repeal Act, right? Just to get rid of a bunch of things at once. But we'll probably not be able to do that just for optics perspective. But there are so many things that we need to get rid of. Everything from healthcare to resources to other things that the NDP have put in that have added these layers of costs and structure that just aren't needed in our society.
One thing that has bothered me, and I've talked about it, is decriminalization and what the disorder on our streets, how it's changed dramatically just in the last couple of years. What would your approach be?
Decriminalization has taken away the tool of police to be able to have a civil society, to be able to help us be able to have a civil society. So it needs to come to an end, and it will come to an end under a Conservative government. I mean, for example, if you've got cars coming and going from a suspected dealer, the police under decriminalization can't stop a car and seize the drugs and use it as evidence to go after the dealer because it's decriminalized. If somebody is sitting in your doorstep smoking crack, there's nothing that the police can do because it's decriminalized. And what is really strange is I can't walk down the street drinking a beer, but I can walk down the street smoking a crack pipe. I mean, what does that say about what this has done in our society? So that needs to come to an end.
Well, how would you do that?
So obviously there's changes on the side that need to be done federally, but we would be supporting our police to be able to crack down and make sure that we do not allow these sort of things to be happening in our society. We never want to get back to a place where we're just arresting people for simple use and possession. I mean, we haven't been doing that since the 1980s. So we're not interested in going back to doing that, but we need to be able to make sure that police can have a civil society. So for example, if there's somebody that's in the hospital, that's in there for care, and they pull out drugs and want to use the drugs, I'm sorry, you can't do that in those places, and the police need to be able to come in and enforce it to make sure that it's a safe environment for the patients that are there, as well as for the people working in a hospital. And
what would you do with the state of mental illness that we see on our street and these repeat offenders who, this bad incident recently where he'd had 60 interactions with police and he was on probation and out and back and forth, and it ends up in a possible
tragedy,
murder charge and assault charge. Where do you come down on secured care? So
there's a number of things in there. So first of all, we've got mental health, we've got addictions, and we have crime. And the three should not be combined. Mental health is mental health issues. It's a health issue. Addictions is an addiction issue. It is a health issue. Crime is a criminal issue. It is a legal issue. And so to deal with the issues of mental health and addiction, first of all, we need to actually build out significant capacity for recovery. And it's something that is sorely missing. If you've got an addict who wants to go into recovery and they get we think we've got space for you in 5 months. I mean, that's unacceptable. And so we're going to build out everything from doctor-prescribed treatment to short-term treatment and recovery to longer-term recovery, because people need to be able to not just get over the addictions, but also be able to get them life skills, break their habits that they're in, get them an opportunity to be able to reintegrate into society. We're actually going to look at involuntary care. So where you have situations, for example, where somebody's OD'd and be brought back to life, clearly they're at risk of harming themselves. And so from a mental health perspective and as a society perspective, we should be able to say, I'm sorry, but you need to be able to go into treatment. We can do the same thing with some things on the legal side. But the one that I actually really look at is if you have, let's say, an 11-year-old daughter and she's addicted and she doesn't want to go into treatment, there's nothing you can do as a parent. And I actually think we should give an option for for parents to be able to say, I want my child to be able to have the best quality of life possible. I want her to be able to get onto a healthy path and actually put her into treatment and recovery. Right now, the only option is to send somebody south of the border at a huge cost. So that's something we have to do. But when it comes on the crime side, there needs to be consequences for crime, especially for these prolific offenders. Police are telling me that 80% of the crime is being caused by 20% of the people. And so these repeat offenders, they need to have guaranteed minimum sentencing so that there is a consequence for crime. Because right now there isn't, and which just emboldens them to do more. And quite frankly, if we end up, particularly in these cases of these violent, prolific offenders that have got multiple cases, multiple charges that are violent and that are at risk of harming people, under a Mental Health Act perspective, if somebody is at risk of harming themselves or others, they can be held and treated and not released until they're no longer considered a threat. And so if we can't deal with this through the legal system because we have to change things that are going on in Ottawa, perhaps we should be doing that through the mental health to make sure that we can make our streets as safe as possible.
And homelessness, any ideas there?
So the key in homelessness, once again, is it's not, you can't just say homelessness is one issue, because it's not. You've got people who are down on their luck that just need to be able to have that opportunity for a place to live and a hand up to be able to get back on their feet. You've got people who have mental health and addiction issues. And so you need to be able to treat the mental health and addiction and then put them into housing. And it has to be that process, because right now, for example, there is a housing project in Victoria that is designed for hard-to-house people that are addicted. And in that housing project, there's a special room for smoking fentanyl and a special room for smoking crack and another special room for doing other drugs. And so the residents go in and use these rooms, then they come out into the common area and they're still smoking. And the society that is running, the nonprofit that is running this thing, their workers are saying, this is an unsafe environment. And so they went to WorkSafe and said, how do we change this? This is an unsafe environment. And the response was that they'd have to wear gas masks. I mean, it's crazy to think that's where we have gone.
The staff have
Yes.
to wear gas masks?
That's crazy to think that's where we have come as a society. One of the workers, they care about these people that are in there. They want to help them get into recovery. They put a sign up with some information about, if you're looking to go into recovery, here's some numbers you can call, here's some support that's there. A ministry person came by and took down the sign and said, you're not allowed to do that because that could offend some people. That could stigmatize some people. And the person who put it up was suspended for a day. This is what we've come to as our society. So this needs to change in order for us to be able to get back to having sort of a civil society and as quite frankly, as a society, have the compassion to get people into treatment and allow them to be able to have some recovery and back into some sort of life.
Well, John, it's been great talking to you again, seeing you again in person, and you've got a busy time ahead of you. All the best.
Thank you, Carole. It's great to see you again.
We'll be back in a moment. So here we are on the cusp of a provincial election. Will it be Premier Eby or Premier Rustad who will have to address these very serious problems? The lack of affordable housing, disorder and random acts of violence on our streets. A third of our community seriously thinking of moving out of BC. We have issues. Please let me know your thoughts on YouTube. Till next time, I'm Carole Taylor.